Good evening, everybody. My name is Diane DiBasella, and I am the director of the Fiscal Sponsorship Program at Fractured Atlas. I just wanted to make sure that everybody can hear me okay. So if you can use the chat functionality on the right-hand side of your screen, just a couple of you, if you can chat to me and just let me know that the sound is okay and that you can hear me, that would be great. Great, thank you. So thanks for joining the webinar tonight. This is a webinar about budget building for fiscally sponsored projects, and I am recording the webinar, and I'll also be emailing it to each of you afterwards so that you have a copy of the PDF of the slides. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the question functionality on the right-hand side to ask a question. I will be having some time at the end remaining so that I can answer any questions that you have. But otherwise, I'm just going to jump right in. So you should be able to see on your screen our title slide that says Budget Building for Fiscally Sponsored Projects. And what we're going to cover tonight is we're going to talk about best practices for building a project budget and an operating budget. I'm going to talk about what the difference is between those as well. I'm going to talk about how to develop realistic projections. So where do those numbers come from if this is the first time you're creating a budget? I'm going to talk about how to match your budget line items to your accounting line items. I'm going to briefly go over income-based budgeting, and I'm also going to talk about your budget's relationship to your mission and really how to pull it all together. But first, before I dig in, it's nice to virtually meet you. I'm Diane DiBasella, as I mentioned. I'm in the top left corner of the screen, and I'm the program director for fiscal sponsorship at Fractured Atlas. I've been working at Fractured Atlas for the last 8 years, and in the time that I've been working at Fractured Atlas, I've gotten to participate in helping to grow our fiscal sponsorship program. So when I started in 2006, we had 5 employees, and we had 400 projects that were raising about $2 million a year. Today we have 35 employees. We have over 3,500 projects around the country who are raising $22 million a year. So it's really exciting to be working at an organization that I get to see on a daily basis the impact that our services have on artists. And also I'm very fortunate because I get to see a lot of the awesome artwork that people are producing. My job at Fractured Atlas is really to help artists raise money. And so I focus on doing this by helping to develop online tools that hopefully make your lives easier, and also by developing educational tools to teach you different things related to fundraising topics. The top row is the fiscal sponsorship staff. So you could be working with any one of us at any time. Teresa is right after me, and then Malcolm, Amanda, Nathan, Jason, and Holly. And there is one person missing. I just realized Deborah also should be on the slide. I apologize to Deborah for not including her, but I haven't updated the slide in a little bit. So to talk a little bit about Fractured Atlas first, just to make sure you're all familiar with us. Fractured Atlas is a nonprofit technology company, and our focus is on the arts. And what we do is we help design business tools to help artists and arts organizations manage their businesses. Just to mention a couple of our different programs and services, we do have an insurance program. The insurance program is focused on business insurance. So that's really any type of insurance that you might need to operate your business. That could be liability insurance, officers and directors insurance, equipment insurance if you're owning or renting something. Pretty much any type of insurance that you might need, we can typically help you find. We have discipline-specific policies, so these are really specific to your needs. So if you're a fire performer and you're coming to us, we can help you get insurance. We have several artists on staff that are also insurance brokers. So they understand the art world and they also understand the insurance world, which is sort of a rare thing when you're coming across insurance brokers. We try to make our online tools as simple and easy to use as possible because we all know insurance is not the most fun or engaging thing to talk about, but it is sometimes a necessity. So we're here to try to help you navigate, what are the options out there and to help you find the best policies for your needs. We also really try to make sure that we're never upselling you. We're always trying to get you the minimum that you need in order to be covered. So that's our insurance program. Most people, when they are getting insurance, it's because somebody else is telling them they need it. And that is very common. You're renting a space and they tell you need insurance. And that's when you would come to us. Otherwise, it might be because you are purchasing something big that you want to get insured, or you're forming a company and you're not sure what kind of insurance needs you have. But in any of those situations, we can help you out. We also have a program called Artfully. And Artfully is a web-based business software for artists. And what it does is it enables you to do a number of things all in one place. So you can sell tickets, you can take donations, you can manage your contacts, and you can do things like connect it with MailChimp, so you can easily send out newsletters. You can connect it with your fiscal sponsorship so that you can receive donations on the Artfully platform that are tax deductible to your donors. Artfully is a really amazing tool in terms of helping you manage all of the people that are related to your project or your work. So if you haven't ever looked at it, you should check it out. The website is artful.ly, and it can be a great place if you're just trying to get organized and make sure you know everybody you're connecting with and how you're connecting with them. It's free to use. The only cost that's associated with it is if you sell tickets through it, but the customer management software aspect is all free. We also have a program called Space Finder. And Space Finder was launched initially in New York City as a program called New York City Performing Arts Spaces. And Fractured Atlas merged with New York City Performing Arts Spaces, I believe back in 2008 or 9. And what we decided at that point in time was that this was an amazing model that we wanted to expand to other cities. So what Space Finder is it's software that we build that enables artists and arts organizations to find space. And what we do is we partner with other organizations in the country to host this software with them, and so that artists can then go to those sites and search for space in their area. The cities that are listed on the slide are a number of the cities that we are currently hosting Space Finder in. So if you're in any of these cities or these areas and you wanted to check out, space, or you're looking to find space, definitely use our Space Finder. All right, so those are our key programs. I'm not going to talk about fiscal sponsorship because my assumption is if you're on this call, you are either already fiscally sponsored or you understand what fiscal sponsorship is. If you are interested in learning more about fiscal sponsorship, we do offer webinars that go into great depth about what fiscal sponsorship is and what our fiscal sponsorship program does. In December, we are not offering any more webinars this month, but they will start again in January. So check back on our website or sign up for our announcements to find out more about the webinars that are going to be coming up. So going to be really basic to start. Just what is a budget? Budgets can help you do a few things. They can help you, let me rephrase that. A budget is a couple of different things. It is an estimate of your income and your expenses for a set period of time. It's typically over a year-long period, and you can really decide what that year-long period is. Typically, it's written, which should be fairly obvious. It's often based on performance. So it's based on, what you've done in the past or what you plan to do in the future. Any type of budget can really help to ensure that your resources and people and equipment are deployed appropriately. So it's really critical to have a budget when you're starting any type of project or organization or collective to really understand what your needs are going to be and how you're going to meet them in the future and at the current time as well. As I started to say earlier, budgeting can help you do a few things. It can help you to understand and track how much is spent on your various programs or projects. It can help you connect your expenditures, so those are all your expenses that you incur, to the revenues that result. And that's a really key thing, is to understand what that relationship is. It can help you cope with cash flow issues, so knowing when you're going to need money and when you're going to have money. It can help you determine whether or not your fundraising efforts are costing more than the money they generate. So if you're throwing this huge, awesome, amazing fundraising event, but ultimately you're only bringing in, $5,000, but the event costs $7,000, then a budget can help you learn that and make sure that you don't do that again in the future. A budget can also help you decide who is going to be involved, how they're going to be involved, and when. So there's a lot of key things that when you're sitting down to really plan for your organization or your project, a budget can really inform. So people ask me sometimes why budgeting is important. And there are a number of reasons, but for fiscally sponsored projects, it can be incredibly important to have a strong budget when you're approaching funders or grantors. That's one of the first things that they look at when they get your application. They consider it a great way to get a feel for the project without having to, go through all the verbiage and hype that's related to the project. It's really easy for them to see if the request amount is appropriate and to get a sense of your situation by quickly glancing at your budget. So this is a really important thing to keep in mind when you're building your budget, is that if a grantor gets your proposal and they're flipping through it really fast and they pull out the budget, you want it to tell a story that's clear and easy for them to understand. So this is a sample of an operating budget. There are a few different types of budgets, and I thought that we'd talk about the organizational budget, or it can be called organizational budget or operating budget first. So this is a sample template. You'll notice that it's broken into two distinct sections, with the income listed first and then the expenses. There can be any number of line items within a budget, and they can vary based on what you do, but there should always be income and expense sections. I often see projects submit a budget that they're trying to get reviewed before they submit it to a funder, and they send it to us, and it's only a list of expenses. But you need to also include the income to show them where you plan on having the money come from. Typically, an operating budget or an organizational budget, it applies to your entire organization's activity. It includes everything that you guys do, and it's typically based on your fiscal year. So some projects will say to me, well, we don't have a fiscal year. Should I do it according to Fractured Atlas's fiscal year? Should I do it according to the funder's fiscal year that I'm applying to? It's really up to you to determine what your fiscal year is. Many nonprofit organizations set their fiscal year from July 1st to June 30th. Fractured Atlas happens to have a fiscal year that's from September 1st to August 31st. There are some people that operate on a fiscal year that's based on the calendar year. It's really up to you to choose what's going to work best for you. I typically suggest to people also to think about when is your busy season. So if you slow down in the summer, then maybe having a fiscal year based starting in September, ending in August is a good idea, because you can, start your budget process in the summer when you have downtime. If the summer is incredibly busy, then you might want to think about setting it up for a different time of the year. Sorry about that. A project budget is the estimated financial plan for a project. So you need funding for a project, and you have to create a budget for it. The document should include the expenses you anticipate incurring for any sort of specified period of time, as well as the earned income that will be generated during the course of the project. The budget is an important component of a proposal, as I've already mentioned, as it represents that financial picture of the project, and it can greatly add to the other's understanding of your project. And I'm going to talk about how these two budgets relate to each other. So I have an example up here of the Shakespeare Shakes Theater Company, and they spend $100,000 on their projects and $25,000 in overhead costs. So what's the overhead rate? And I'm going to talk about what this means a little bit, but I wanted to give you this example here. So project budgets may include items for your overhead costs, which sometimes these costs can also be called indirect costs. So this allows your project to bear a portion of the administrative costs of the day-to-day operations. So let's say you're a theater company and you're producing Romeo and Juliet. So the theater company has its operational budget or organizational budget, and the project budget would be for Romeo and Juliet. So as I said, this allows the project to bear a portion of your admin costs of the day-to-day. So this can be included as one line item. So you might just want to have a line item for overhead, or it can be multiple line items depending on how you want to show it. Some overhead items can include a percentage of, let's say, your bookkeeper's salary or your office rent or your utilities. These are items that are incurred whether or not you have that particular project for which you're budgeting, and you can't run your organization or your company without it. The formula used for allocating overhead costs to your project budgets is usually based on your organization's overhead costs to the organization's total program expenses. So this is what I was trying to show you here, is that if you have a $25,000 project and a $100,000 organizational overhead costs or operational budget, it would be a 25% overhead rate. So that means for every dollar that is spent on your project, 25 cents of that dollar is spent on overhead. And that's a nice number to be able to understand, because funders will want to know that. They'll want to know what percent of your project budget is going to overhead. They also might tell you, we don't fund overhead. So that is something to keep in mind when you're creating your project budget is, do I want to include this? Is it necessary for me to share this with the funder if this is something that they're going to be concerned about? So a budget narrative is something that is useful in defining the budget costs that are included on a project budget. A budget narrative is often used to explain the line items in the budget. So, you might have these line items saying program coordinator. Well, what is a program coordinator? What are they doing? Why are we paying them $35,000? You can create budget narratives in a couple of different ways. One is that you can have the notes to the budget with footnote style numbers or letters on the actual line items in the budget that are keyed to numbered or lettered explanations. So that's the example that I'm showing here. Or if there are a number of unusual line items that you feel like need clarification and you want to provide more information, and there's sort of an extensive explanation required for the figures, you may want to structure the budget narrative as straight text. So that would be, you're not even assigning a footnote to each of the explanations. You could just do like a couple of paragraphs or one paragraph at the end of your budget to sort of explain overall what the sort of questions might be that you're trying to anticipate somebody might looking at it might have. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about realistic projections. This is something that comes up a lot for people that are either, sort of new to budget building or maybe new to even producing work. One of the best ways to set your budget is to research your past spending. So this would be, gathering any of your past credit card statements, any sort of like utility bills, check stubs, receipts, really anything that you think will help you figure out how much you spent last year, or if possible, over the last couple of years. Because the more informed you can be, the better your budget is going to be structured. And this is going to help you make projections for the coming year. For most people, estimating income is easier than figuring out the anticipated expenses. So your income should include all of the money your organization can really reasonably expect to earn or to receive during the 12-month period. And that includes anything from grants to individual donations, to in-kind donations, to sales. So if you're selling tickets or you're selling your actual physical artwork, it can be compensation. So if you're being paid to actually go perform someplace, or if you're being paid to teach a workshop, it can include rent or royalties, depending on what kind of work you have. But if you're unsure about your income, for example, if this is your first year in operation, it is really better to underestimate and to be pleasantly surprised when you have a surplus in your budget than to, overestimate and be unable to pay a bill that comes due. And this is something I can't stress enough. If it's your first time building your budget, your first year producing, don't overestimate the capacity for what you're able to bring in as income. So you really need to also plan for the unexpected. You should be modeling out all of the scenarios. So what are the worst case scenarios and what are the best case scenarios? I launched a project 2 years ago. That is a fiscally sponsored project at Fractured Atlas. I'm not allowed to manage it, but one of my coworkers manages it for me. But when I built my budget, I did not include a line item for insurance, which is sort of horrifying and shocking that I didn't realize I was going to need insurance. I was starting a CSA, which is a community-supported art project where shareholders could buy into owning different pieces of fine art that was made by local artists here in New York. And at the end of the season of all of these artists creating hundreds of pieces of artwork, we didn't sell all of it. And I needed to store it someplace, so I stored it in my apartment. But the risk of having $25,000 worth of artwork in your apartment is great if there's a flood or a fire or anything like that. So all of a sudden I needed to buy insurance. And I had not budgeted for getting insurance. So I did need to drop, I think it was $510 on the insurance, but I had fortunately cushioned. I had a $2,000 cushion in my budget that because it was the first year I was doing it, so I just didn't know what was going to come up. So, depending on your budget size, you want to think about what's a reasonable cushion for me to have, because there's going to be expenses you can't anticipate. When you're estimating your expenses, it's challenging, but it's not impossible. A yearly budget typically includes a lot of fixed and variable expenses. And there's also discretionary spending that you might have. So your fixed expenses are those that tend to stay the same from month to month, and they're sort of part of your general operating. So it's things like rent, compensation to artists, utility bills. Fixed expenses also include regular expenses that show up only once or twice a year, like business insurance or taxes, or if you're getting health insurance for yourself or for your employees. Variable expenses may occur on a regular basis, but they'll vary in amount from month to month. So you may have things come up where, let's say, you're purchasing meals for your crew, and maybe you do this on certain months when you're in production, but you don't do it on other months. Also, you should keep in mind when your utility bills arrive each month, they may vary greatly depending on the weather and how much heat or air conditioning you use during any particular month. So when you're budgeting for a variable expense, you can estimate each month's bill, or you can estimate the entire year's expense and divide it by 12 to come up with an average monthly estimate. Sort of up to you to figure out how you want to structure that. Your variable expenses also include spending that does not occur on a regular or planned basis. So you may not purchase a plane ticket to a conference every month, but you may plan on getting one in the fall. Even if this is not a regular expense, you can still plan for it by putting it into the budget. You may notice that some of these expenses could fall in either the fixed or the variable category, but when in doubt about whether a certain expense is fixed or variable, you should assign it to the category that makes the most sense to you. For example, you may receive some sort of compensation for speaking about your work on an annual basis from like a specific event. Let's say you get invited to a conference every year. You can call this fixed income. But if, on the other hand, if you receive more than one compensation throughout the year for speaking, you can label this as a variable expense. Where the income or expense is listed is really less important than making sure it appears somewhere on your budget and that you stick to it. If you subtract your fixed and your variable expenses from your total anticipated income and you have some money left over, then you will have room for discretionary spending in your budget. And discretionary purchases are things that your organization might not consider to be absolutely necessary, but that will help move your work forward. So discretionary purchases might include things like buying tickets to go see other work of artists that you're interested in, or celebrating things for the people that you're working with, or if you need to get a taxi home late one night after rehearsing, or you need to offer somebody else that. So those are some of the discretionary purchases that could come up that you'll want to think about whether or not you want to have a discretionary line item in your budget to sort of account for those. So now that you've really thought about your estimation of your income and your expenses, it's time to start thinking about how you're going to align those budget line items to your accounting line items. Doing so is going to create ease and harmony for the people that you're working with, and for you when it comes time to sort of allocate where all of your money is and how it's being spent. So your budget line items should align with your accounting or your financial statement line items. And the structure of your full operating budget should match your chart of accounts, which is usually what is referred to, your accounting system is referred to. So it's the structure of your accounting system is called your chart of accounts. And this will ensure you have effective comparisons between your budget and your actuals. And this is something that, sometimes people ask me, well, what do I use to do this? Do I have to get QuickBooks online? Do I have to have, really sophisticated tools for this? There are free things online that you can use to help you with bookkeeping. So that's, tracking what you actually spent. But there's also really simple ways to do it in an Excel spreadsheet, if that's, where you're at and what you feel comfortable using. Making sure that you understand what you actually projected and what you actually spent, though, is going to be important for you to continue to build your budget each year. Any sort of mismatch between your budget items and your accounting items can create extra work for you and for anybody that's working with you to help you do that, because then they're going to have to translate between the two. And it sort of undermines the usefulness of your financial reports and your budgeting process if they don't line up. This is really important for your expenses. So when you're accounting, your financial statement line items exist without corresponding budget line items, it can result in budget overages or errors in reporting line item balances. So this is something just to keep in mind. If all of a sudden you have expenses that don't fit within your budget line items, really try to be holistic when you think about your budget and every single thing that could possibly come up. This is really most critical for 501c3 organizations. For fiscally sponsored projects, you don't have to worry about this as much, but for 501c3s, when you're creating expense budget line items, you need to really be aware of how those internal line items translate to the specified line items for outside reporting requirements. So if you're reporting to the IRS on a 990, or if you have common funder grant applications, or agency data gathering, such as the Cultural Data Project, you really need these to match. And while this shouldn't dictate precisely how you construct your budget, being able to easily crosswalk your items to the required items will help facilitate those meetings and those reporting requirements so that you guys are all using your time most efficiently. So I want to talk a little bit about income-based budgeting. Some of the probably most reliable budgets yielding the best fiscal results for organizations are conservative and income-based. So what that means is that you're budgeting for your income first. This means you're basing your income targets on realistic expectations, and you're only including reliable income in the budget. This is income that you absolutely know you're going to get. So you would never include an income projection that simply fills the gap to cover expenses. This really sets up your project and your organization for a budget deficit if the organization fails to hit the plugged income targets. So ensuring that your expenses are lower than the dependable income total will ensure that you're going to be able to meet your budget. Obviously, this requires patience, and it requires really thinking about setting up your organizational and your programmatic priorities, and really thinking about how to time new projects or new things that you're working on. So that also means that what if scenarios are something that, you can do this desired project program if that additional revenue comes in, but it's, possible that it's not going to happen. And that's not really how you want to operate. You want to know exactly what you're going to be able to do over the course of the year to fulfill what you set out to create. Income-based budgeting is my preference. I think that it is the safest and it is the most reliable in terms of really knowing what your year is going to look like. However, there are other approaches to budgeting that are commonly used by small and mid-sized groups. Some combination of all of these approaches can be used, and it depends on your circumstances. But there's one called incremental budgeting, and that begins with your prior year totals, and it builds the subsequent year's budget by calculating your percentage increase and decrease. So let's say you had your actuals from 2012 and 2013 and 14. What you could do is you could look at year to year, line item to line item, what the either percentage increase or decrease was for each line item from year to year. And that could help you estimate for, let's say, 2015, how much you should increase or decrease each of those line items. Another type of budgeting is called zero-based budgeting, and that's where you start from scratch each year. So it's really starting from nothing. You just have like a blank sheet of paper and you're thinking, how much can we raise? How much can we spend? What are the most important mission activities that we absolutely have to fulfill? This really helps to reevaluate all of your assumptions about your work and what you're able to do. And some organizations do choose to do this on an annual basis. They start from scratch. They don't look at the past year's numbers. So it really depends on what sort of fits your needs. Like I said, I'm all about the income first because I think that if I know where my income's coming from, I'm going to be able to really determine what is the work that I can actually produce based on that income. So you have to think about what story your budget is telling. Budgeting acts as a sort of financial map or as a guide for your project or your organization. And this can really reflect what your overall mission statement is. Developing and implementing a budget can really help you provide benchmarks against which to compare actual results and to develop corrective measures. So you're able to really look at it and analyze to say, we did this last year and based on these line items, this wasn't exactly working and this didn't really produce the results we wanted. So what can we do differently this year? Most of our fiscally sponsored projects are, when you guys come into the program, you come in and you submit project descriptions that are typically your mission statement. And your mission statement contains your organizational values. It talks about your goals and the strategies to reach those goals. And these things can serve as really key components when you're developing an annual or quarterly budget. For example, Fractured Atlas's mission, I stated it earlier, is to provide technology tools to artists and organizations so that they can become better businesses. So our portion of our budget is dedicated to hiring developers to build software. Likewise, if there was a project whose mission includes providing guitars to public schools, they would devote a large portion of their expenses to purchasing guitars. So this is like the type of thing that you have to think about. What is the story that you were telling through your budget? And what are sort of the key things that could come out of that? Is the best way to really explain it through the narrative that you would include at the end? Or is it through, if you're submitting a grant proposal, would it just be included in the proposal and you'll let the budget really just show the financial situation? So when you are, strategizing about your budget really lays out the organization's financial strategy. And the strategic budget goals, you might have long-term or you might have short-term, depending on the length and the complexity of your project. Any sort of growing project or organization whose strategy includes opening 2 new shows each quarter would budget for costs in space rental, marketing, costumes, artist compensation on a quarterly basis. But if strategic management calls for building a brand, money in the budget would be set aside for marketing consultants and experts to help develop your organization's image. So you need to think really how the strategy for what you're working on is implemented within your budget. Budgets serve as a planning tool and a control mechanism for small projects and small organizations. So, for example, if a certain area of your project is struggling, and let's say with poor customer service, so that's something Fractured Atlas does. We have customer service. We're getting feedback from clients that we're not doing well. A portion of our budget might be dedicated to upgrading our customer service software or implementing new training techniques, really digging in to see what we're failing at. This also helps the small organization keep a handle on costs, and it acts as a control mechanism. If at, let's say, the end of the year, the customer service feedback has improved, and all of a sudden we're hearing that we're doing a much better job than we were 6 months ago, that means that the money set aside in the budget for improvement can really be seen in the context of the overall outcome. And it really helps you to sort of develop that narrative and that story to be able to share with either your funders or with your general supporters of your organization or your project. So, what next? What do you need to do? What happens after the budget is complete? So I would say, start from scratch or find a template. It depends on what you feel most comfortable with. Think about who is going to be on your team to help you really do the budget. And I would recommend, even if you're a one-man shop or a one-woman shop, I would recommend that you ask somebody else if they can take a look at it for you, and if they can help you talk through it and be able to really articulate what you're doing in it. Because having somebody else's eyes on it can definitely be of value when you're building a budget like this. Build. You might take a stab at it and then have to sit back and say, okay, I need to really think about this a little bit more to make sure that my estimations are correct, that I'm not forgetting anything. And again, ask for feedback. After the budget is complete, it's really important to remember that you may be required to report back to a funder on your budget or to your board. So at the completion of the project or the year, you may need to include a comparison between your org budget or your project budget and the amount of money you actually spent. So some funders will require that you explain variations of a significant greater or lesser amount. If you decide to form a 501c3 and you have a board, they will want to know in detail why your projections were above or below. So what's causing that? Why are you $10,000 off on this one line item? Above all, your project budget is a document that you are going to have for a year or for the duration of your project. So really preparing it accurately and well organized can be essential in the stability and the growth of your project. And this is really important to consider and to think about. Sometimes I have people ask me if they should have different versions of their organizational budget for different funders. My answer would be no. You have an organizational budget that is for your project or for your organization, and it should, once you create it, it should be what you have for the year. Your actuals are what you're tracking over there and what's actually happening. But your budget shouldn't be something willy-nilly that you change whenever you think, well, I should put this in it for this funder, but I'll take it out for this funder. I know that there's some questions, but I'm just going to, in case there are people that don't want to stay on for the questions that are at the end, I just wanted to mention a couple of other resources that are out there. The Cleveland Foundation budget templates are some great templates that you could check out if you're trying to find some. A website for nonprofit accounting basics really goes into depth about different accounting topics and sort of how to provide some more visuals than what I did on how it looks when you're actually building your budget and thinking about also tracking your actuals. There's also a budget template on the Fundraising Basics website. So like I said, I will email this around. So if you're frantically trying to write these down, I will email the slides around so that you can all have a copy of these. 2 books that I recommend reading if you really feel like reading 2 long books on budgeting, but these are actually great resources for if you're like looking. The first one, the budget building book for nonprofits, is extremely helpful as a tool that you can like pull off your shelf and flip through and easily find information that you don't actually have to sit down and read the whole book. Budgeting and Financial Management for Nonprofits is more of a narrative, and it's also it's I wouldn't say it's a great read, because I'm not going to lie and say that reading a budget book is a great read, but there's a ton of information on there if you really are looking to dig into some of this information and understand it better in order to inform your choices around your budget. So we do have a number of webinars, as I mentioned earlier. Starting in January, we typically offer 4 to 5 webinars each month. They're usually on Tuesday evenings at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We offer a combination of any of these 7 webinars, and sometimes we even have special ones that are not on this list. So earlier this year, we did one focused on PR. We did another one that was focused on monthly pledges and how to increase your monthly pledges. We did another one that was focused on digital engagement and how to engage people digitally. So those are just some of the bonus webinars that we occasionally offer. We do record all of these. So if you're interested in listening to any of them and you can't actually participate in them live, please feel free to email us at support@fracturedatlas.org, and we can email you a recording of the sessions. So that's our phone number and our email address. I am going to answer some questions now, but I just wanted to get to the end. For anybody that can't stay on for the questions, please thank you so much for joining tonight, and please feel free to email us if you have any additional questions that you don't have time to ask right now. So let me jump into these questions. Looks like we only have a couple. So somebody asked, if this is the first time we're creating a budget for a film, for example, would it make most sense to do the from scratch budget? So that's the zero-based budget. I would say yes. If it's your first time, it would sort of be what I would do is a combination of a zero-based budget and an income-based budget. So you would start with your income. What are you really going to be able to raise and to earn for this film that will be able to help you create it? Are you going to have fundraising events? Are you going to have, grants, donors? Is there some sort of earned revenue component that you are going to be pre-selling something, or things like that? And then work from there to actually fill in the rest of your expenses. Somebody else asked, are there any important items to know for filmmakers seeking fiscal sponsorship? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. If you're asking specifically about applying for fiscal sponsorship, there is a lot of information on our website, so you might want to check it out there. If there's something more specific, please feel free to type it, and I will see what I can do. I got a couple of people saying thank you. Well, thank you for joining. I appreciate you calling in. Somebody asked, as a filmmaker, can I still bring on a fiscal sponsor even if I plan to distribute the film commercially? That's a very good question, and it's a frequent question we get at Fractured Atlas. We only can work with projects that do not have any investors currently involved with them. So it is okay if you eventually plan to distribute it through a for-profit commercial distribution house. But while you are sponsored by Fractured Atlas, you can't have a commercial distributor involved, and you can't have any private investors who are going to own your work. So this means that you could use fiscal sponsorship for, let's say, the pre-production, the production, and the post-production, and then you could end your sponsorship You could spend down all of the money you raised through the fiscal sponsorship, and then you could engage in a for-profit distribution deal, or you could start getting investors that are going to own, some sort of rights to the work. Somebody else asked, our group has been performing for nearly 4 years, and most of the artist fees were in kind. Is this an issue as far as asking for a somewhat large amount for artists going forward? Absolutely not. I think that if you find a grant that's appropriate that does fund artist fees, then there's no reason that a funder would not want to, contribute if the artists have been doing it in kind in the past. I think that a common thing and an unfortunate thing that happens in budgets sometimes when there's individual artists involved is that when you create your budget, you create a line item to get paid, and you create an expense for your artist fees. And if you don't meet your budget needs, that is the area that people often don't get compensated in, or that expense becomes instead an in-kind contribution. So that's just something to keep in mind, but it's not a problem to ask a funder for compensation or for a grant to cover compensation that's been in kind in the past. Somebody said, we have no money and are in our first year organization and we are freaking out. I feel you. It's not a fun place to be. But it's you have to really think about it small and at a starting place of what is the bare minimum that we need to get by and where are we going to get that from. So really structuring who you're going to be asking for individual donations from, who you're going to be asking for grants from. There are a number of grants that are great for startups and for small organizations. And they typically do want to see that you have individual donors and support as well. But don't stress out terribly. It's going to be okay. Hopefully that panic will only last temporarily. Somebody else asked, in past budgets presented to potential funders, we have been told to do an inflated ask and budget for the inflated ask in the proposal, and then wind down when the actual award comes in. You seem to be saying that we should not do this, correct? I think that if the funder is advising you to do that, if they're telling you this is how we want you to submit a budget to us, that's fine. But if you're thinking about how much you should ask for from a funder, I think that's what you're talking about, is really the ask amount in your budget. I would recommend asking for something that you actually think is realistic for them to give you. So if you see that they typically give $10,000 grants to organizations or projects that have a $50,000 budget, then it is completely appropriate for you to ask for a $10,000 grant if you have a $50,000 budget. If your budget is $25,000, you might want to think about scaling it back, because if you think about percentage-wise how much they've given to other organizations of their budget, so if they were only giving 20% of a budget, that's something you'll want to think about. And that's often something that I like to look at if I'm applying to a grant. I will go to to GuideStar, where you can sort of sneak around and you can look at the funders 990 and you can see who they've given money to in the past and how much they've given. And then you can look up who they've given it to and see what their budget size is. So it kind of informs your decision, because you can look at that ratio of percentage funded to percent to their budget. I think that can be helpful. Somebody asked, if we're new to fiscal sponsorship, where do we begin with Fractured Atlas? Are we assigned someone specifically who oversees our budget? So you are not assigned a specific staff member. The way that we operate at Fractured Atlas is we all work together to support all of our projects. And we answer questions as they come in through our help desk and through our phones. So you could talk to any of the six of us at any point in time. But your budget is really up to you to manage and to oversee. If you would like feedback on it, if you'd like somebody on our staff to take a look at it, we'll always be happy to do that and to give you feedback on it. But ultimately, it's up to you to create it and really figure out what's best for your organization. If you are at this point where you're like sort of struggling with starting it or with finalizing it, and you need a little bit more guidance and one-on-one attention, we do offer free one-on-one consultations by phone. So you could always set up a time with a staff member to really talk about how to put your budget together. And you can email support@Fractured to set up the consultation. Somebody else asked, can you discuss compensating your time, or at least offsetting your expenses, as you are building a project or organization? How would this look in a budget? So this would be, a line item for staff, or for, depending on what kind of work you're doing, it could be for artist fees, it could be for admin fees. In the budget that I created for my CSA, I did a lot of the administration work because that's what I know how to do. And we did have line items for me to be compensated for administrative fees. And this was based on an hourly rate. In our first year, I didn't get paid anything. And this is our second year, and we're hoping that I'm going to get paid something. But again, we're really focused on paying the artists first. So that is where, when we have built our budget, we built it last year with the understanding that if we didn't sell out of all of the work that we created, that I would not be paid, and we didn't sell out of the work. So I own a lot of amazing artwork, but I didn't actually get paid in money. I got paid in artwork. So it just worked out a little differently in our budget than some. But you can absolutely account for your own compensation within your budget. And the line item would be different according to actually what you're doing. What if our project has already received grants prior to fiscal sponsorship? What is Fractured Atlas's role, if any, in regulating these funds? So Fractured Atlas does not regulate grant funds that you've received prior to fiscal sponsorship unless you want the money to come through us. So let's say you applied for a grant a couple of months ago, and the funder is telling you, now we're going to give it to you, but we want you to have a fiscal sponsor. Obviously, that money would then need to come through Fractured Atlas, and we would handle it the same way we handle all grant and income for fiscally sponsored projects. But if this is a grant that you've already received and it's come to you, I hope that everybody can still hear me. I just got a little pop-up saying the sound quality was not doing so well. Hopefully it's okay. So if you received a grant 6 months ago directly, you don't need to, give that money to Fractured Atlas. We are not going to charge you 7% on it. You're welcome to take that and keep it directly and spend it down. The only thing that we will ask you is in your annual report that will ask people to file if they've released money in January. You'll be required to submit the annual report in January if you've released money. We will ask you if you had any money outside of the fiscal sponsorship program that you received for your project or that you spent for your project, and that would just be a place where you could tell us about it, but you're not required to, share it in any other way. Somebody asked, when proposing project budgets for grants or funding, should I ever avoid including my personal salary or hourly rate for all of the administrative work with some funders? If so, how do I handle this expense? I don't think you should avoid including your hourly rate or your personal salary for the administrative work that you do. It should be included in the budget. It should be included with the expectation that you're actually going to receive it. And if you believe it's going to actually be in kind, that you are going to be donating it as in kind, then you need to reflect that in the budget as well. So on your income side, it would be reflected as a line item as an in-kind donation of time for admin expenses. And on the expense side, it would be reflected as an admin expense for your time. If you actually plan to have, funding coming in for that, then you don't need to have it as an in-kind donation. but it's really up to the funder to determine if they want to cover that kind of admin expenses. Some of them are really only looking to cover artist fees or production costs, and you'll have to figure out for each funder whether or not they cover that kind of expense. Somebody else asked, Fractured Atlas requires a budget for the application. Is this an operational budget or a project budget? It depends on what you're applying for. So some of our fiscally sponsored projects are applying for fiscal sponsorship for their organization, and some of our fiscally sponsored projects are only applying for fiscal sponsorship for a one-time project. So if you were applying for your organization, you would submit an organizational budget or an operational budget, and if you're applying for a one-time project like Romeo and Juliet, you would apply just for that project budget. Somebody asked, I've heard that even if you don't think you will end up with enough money to get paid, you should put it in the budget so that funders don't think you're doing art on the side. They want to know you're spending your time on it. That's correct. I always think you should reflect the expenses that are in there or that you incur. And if you have, let's say you have in-kind expenses, or let's say you have expenses that are being incurred that you're actually covering those expenses. So let's say, for example, like for the CSA, our first year, I covered the cost of hosting our website, which was like $200 a year, but I personally paid for that because we didn't have enough money in the budget to do it, and it was a necessity. So we had in there that that was reflected as me as an individual donor giving $200. Of course, my name wasn't put in there, but I did put the $200 into individual donations. Okay, I think that's it for the questions, guys, unless anybody else has any. Oh, there's one. What is a reasonable typical amount for an artist fee for hourly? My normal rate is $90. It depends on a number of factors. So a reasonable hourly rate for an artist fee would be dependent upon where you're located. So depending on your location and the cost of living there, the hourly rate could be much higher or much lower than different specific geographic areas. It also depends on your budget size. So if your budget size is, if you have an annual operating budget of $10,000 and you're paying yourself $90 an hour, that's kind of crazy. But if you have a $100,000 budget and you're paying yourself or your artist $90 an hour, that could be more reasonable. It really depends on how it's related to other areas in your budget as well. In a nonprofit project, you would typically see that the amount being paid to the artists and to the individuals who are running it is appropriate in relation to the overall budget size. So you wouldn't be compensating somebody $90,000 a year for a annual operating budget of $100,000. But if you have a $25 million budget and you're compensating somebody $100,000 a year, it makes a little more sense. So there's no, I don't have specific guidelines to say these are the percentages of what your salary or your compensation should be in relation to your budget size. But I believe there is a tool, and I'm blanking on the name of it right now. If you wanted to email me, I know that the insurance director just recently told me about a new tool where you could actually type in different estimates to get what your artist's fees could be charging at, and in different locations. So if you want to email me at support@fractured.us, I could look that up for you. Somebody said this has been the greatest webinar ever. Thank you. Awesome. I'm glad that it's helpful. Somebody else asked, what platform or software should I start with to write up my budget? I don't have one specific one that I would recommend in general. Some of the tools that I listed on the second to the last slide. Let me pull that back up. Some of these can be helpful if you are trying to find a template to start. There's not really I don't have recommended software for building a budget. Most budgets are just in Excel spreadsheets. So, Fractured Atlas is our budget, our annual budget is, $26 million a year. Oops, sorry, my PowerPoint just quit. If our annual budget is I was just saying $26 million a year, and we track that all in Excel spreadsheets. We do our accounting and our actuals in QuickBooks, but our budget is all through an Excel spreadsheet. Sorry that my computer is freaking out a little bit, but this is our last question. Somebody asks, two more questions. Can you suggest some places to find typical costs for film production line items? I actually don't know a specific place to find exactly that, but I would recommend reaching out to some of the film organizations that exist to support film artists. So, for example, IFP is a great organization that might be able to guide you to find line items for film costs. I also assume that if you went to Google and just typed that in, you'd be able to find plenty of samples of film production budgets that show line items and different sort of examples of that. And somebody asked, do you provide copies of your slides? I do, and I will be sending them tomorrow to everybody that was on the call tonight. So with that, I'm actually going to wrap up. But again, I just wanted to thank you all for calling in and for listening to me talk for a very long time. I know that budgets aren't exactly exciting or thrilling, but it's a good thing to become familiar with and to really focus on, because it can only help you as you start your project and grow your organizations. So if you have any questions, please do feel free to email us at support@fracturedatlas.org, and I will send out the recording and the webinar and the slides tomorrow. But thanks so much, and I hope you have a great night. And thanks for all your kind words. I'm getting a lot of thank yous written to me. Very nice. Thanks, guys.